Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Complicated Relationships Reddit Stories. I hope you guys are safe and healthy. Now let's see what we have in store for you today. When we love someone, we carry a part of their soul around with us. Just one betrayal makes it impossible for that person to hold that piece of you again. Well, this is the complete story, so make sure to stay with us until the end. At the suggestion of my therapist, I've decided to write out and share what has transpired in my life over the last year. I did something truly horrible for which the consequences were beyond even the worst thing I could have ever imagined. I am sharing this with the full knowledge that many of you will despise me for what I did and the events that took place because of my betrayal. I am willing to take the hate I will receive by sharing this if it keeps even one person from breaking the heart of someone they love. I'm a 28-year-old female and I was married to a wonderful man I will call William. 8 months ago, my husband confronted me with proof that I had been both emotionally and physically unfaithful. A few days after he confronted me about my infidelity, my husband took his own. I couldn't believe I could do something like that to harm someone I'd loved since we were children, but I did it. If you'd asked either me or William if either of us would ever be unfaithful, we both would have laughed. But to my shock and surprise, I allowed myself to lose focus and strayed. William and I grew up together. He could always make me laugh. Kids can be mean, but William never was. I realized I thought he was cute in 6th grade. It wasn't an official crush until high school. After graduation, we took a year to get good stable jobs near our families and decided to get married. He was my first everything and I was his first everything. A part of me wishes I could say I had a drunken one-night stand and tried to hide it from my husband. But no, I got emotionally and physically involved with a man who was inferior to my husband in every way, shape and form. My husband and I had a strong marriage. As foolish as that sounds to say now, we did. My husband was the epitome of strength. I was the weak one. I had so many chances to stop it before anything happened, but I let it happen. After a brief and heated conversation, he walked out and I never spoke to him again. I tried to contact him in any and every way I could think of. My God, I tried to reach out so many times just to let him know that I am truly sorry. My text to him never showed anything but an unread status to me. So I doubt he read any emails or heard any voicemails either. But everyone said I needed to give him space and time to think. 2 nights after William confronted me at 3:17 a.m., there was a loud knock at the front door. When I opened the door and saw 2 policemen, I knew. They told me that my husband's body had been found. I dropped to my knees and wailed a shriek of agony. I tore at my skin and hair as the police tried to calm me down. By the time the EMTs got there, I was sitting on the steps, rocking back and forth, repeating that I was so sorry. Yeah, there was no way I was making it to the funeral, even if William's family had allowed any of my family to attend. I was kept sedated for days. The first thing I wanted to do when I got out was visit William's grave. But nobody knew where his parents had him buried. They had every right, and now I've been hospitalized twice because I tried to hurt myself. Not asking for pity, I don't want it. Nothing can take this heartache away, and nothing can even numb it. Part of me wishes I had somehow forced him to see me just for a mere moment, to tell him how sorry I am and that I knew our marriage was over. But I didn't get that. No, I didn't deserve it. Until that horrible day, he'd been so unbelievably happy. We both had been. We loved spending nearly every moment together. To go from that kind of bliss to that kind of grief in such a short period ended everything. My words, actions and thoughts betrayed us both. During the pandemic, both William and I spent a lot of time together. I was fortunate enough to teach at an exclusive private school. William worked from home and made a lot of progress on a project he was placed in charge of. The entire world was worried, but we had each other and we enjoyed making the most of it. We simply couldn't get enough of each other, and I cheated on that man, a man I had such a close bond with. I was an idiot in so many ways. My affair was atypical of most in many ways. Some aspects of the relationship and betrayal were slightly less vile, some were colder. The man I had an affair with, I will call Paul. I first encountered him in group Zoom meetings during the pandemic. The first time we met face to face, we shook hands and had some small talk. There was zero attraction, at least from me toward him. During that introduction, I learned he was engaged, and I told him I was happily married to a man I adored. No physical tension, nothing even hinting that would ever be a possibility. The school began allowing half the staff in all areas and half the students to attend school for a week while the other half used Zoom. The next week, the other half would attend on site and vice versa. While eating lunch one day before my next class began, I got an email from Paul. He had written out some toasts and jokes for his upcoming wedding and wanted me to edit what he'd written. I was used to being sent writing to edit, so that was nothing I felt important enough to tell William, coupled with the fact that it all pertained to Paul's wedding and I saw no reason to give my husband a boring detail about that day. The email contained a toast to his parents as well as to the parents of the bride. I took what he'd said and added a few phrases to pull at the heartstrings of all who attended. The jokes directed at his brother, the best man, were hilarious but a little inappropriate for my liking at a wedding. He laughed and said I just don't know his family and that those types of jokes were a family tradition. That email exchange began several months of corresponding back and forth, but as difficult as it may be, not until the very end did anything become inappropriate. Not once did anything become flirtatious. Well, we did talk about S, but from a purely scientific and psychological point of view. There was nothing emotional or physically stimulating to those conversations, and I enjoyed our correspondence due to the fact I was certain there was no temptation on either end. We discussed race, politics, religion, science, and sports, all the things people are hesitant to discuss due to differing opinions. Some of the discussions even got heated. Yes, I proved him wrong, but I wish to God he'd been right. Well, folks, we've got the next part of the story coming up. But before that, just a reminder that if you like what you heard so far, please hit that like button so this story will be seen by many more people around the world. The story continues. For the longest time, all of this took place during work hours. My husband and I had a landline for emergencies, but as soon as we entered the door at home, our smartphones were turned off. Paul didn't even have my number to text until I emailed him with a zinger at the end late in the day. I seriously don't think Paul had any interest in pursuing me as at the time he was smitten with his fiancée. But about a month before their big day, Paul found out his girlfriend had been carrying on an affair with her high school boyfriend for over a year. He was in shock and deeply hurt by the whole situation. I unwittingly became his person to vent to. I don't know where in our string of conversations that things crossed a line, but after a particularly rough night for him, he came to school looking frazzled and I could tell he'd been crying. I hugged him and talked to him a bit. He asked if I could stay after school to talk. Since I had a couple of hours after work each day before William got home, I agreed. In hindsight, I realize now what drew me into my conversations with Paul was a different opinion. William and I had discussed almost any topic two people could discuss. I knew before his reply what William would say when I asked him a question the vast majority of the time. I had mentioned a co-worker named Paul in passing to William, but as there was truly nothing going on, I didn't expound upon anything and he saw no reason to pry. When Paul started seeing a new woman, I felt no jealousy and honestly only happiness for him. But William had to go out of town to a construction site for 3 weeks. While he was away, we FaceTimed every day and I missed him morning, noon and night. But with sudden spare time, I found myself also texting with Paul just to pass the time. Instead of an occasional hour or two after school, Paul and I often had time to grab a bite to eat and a drink or two before heading to our separate homes. Oddly enough, the thing that led us to become physical was me being a klutz and the school nurse not working that week. I sprained my ankle one day walking up some steps to go get lunch. Since the nurse was not on site, I went to Paul assuming he as a coach had numbing spray or an ace bandage. He was working on my ankle when I happened to notice he had an apparent stand. I was a bit taken aback he was getting turned on in some way until I realized from his position he could see slightly up my skirt. I have to admit for a moment I found the fact I was turning him on was stimulating in some way. I adjusted myself to see if a slightly better view would get him more worked up. He called me out on it. I laughed and told him he could work out his frustrations with his new girlfriend. Suddenly he kissed me and I pushed him away. He kissed me again and I gave in. We made out for a few minutes before I realized what I was doing. I hurriedly got out of his classroom and made it down the halls to my classroom. I sat in disbelief of what had just occurred. I didn't plan for it to happen and I was certain Paul didn't either. I didn't know if I should call William and tell him that moment or wait until he got home that night, but when I talked to Paul after classes, he apologized and urged me not to bring any conflict into my marriage and remain just friends. I didn't want to give William more to stress about as he was out of town and focused on his job assignment. After talking with William that night about how things were going, I decided to wait and tell him when he got home. There were things William could not get done due to delays, which meant he had to spend 2 extra weeks. I couldn't tell any of my female friends. I couldn't rely on any family members as they all rightfully loved William to pieces. I was venting to the very last person I should have been discussing it with. One Friday after work, Paul and I went to a new restaurant near the school for dinner. We sat at the bar and had a few drinks as I explained how unsettled I felt knowing I had to tell my husband what had happened. He asked me how I thought William would take the news and I told Paul he might want to call in sick the day after I told William, just in case. He asked if I seriously thought William would beat his bottom and I told him no. Paul confessed he didn't think he would have made it through his breakup if it hadn't been for me. I assured him I was glad to be of assistance and didn't regret helping him. When the realization our friendship would end sunk in, I think we were both a little depressed. I drank too much, he drank too much, and I ended up back at Paul's apartment doing a lot more than kissing. As soon as it was over, my conscience kicked in. Yes, it should have kicked in long before, but I knew beyond all shadows of any doubt my marriage was over and done with. Things got very complicated when William arrived home. It happened to be that time of the month, so I knew there would be no intimacy between us, thankfully. Not in a million years would I have subjected my husband to any diseases. Regardless of how much I wanted to make love to William one last time, I couldn't allow that to happen. I wrote out a long letter to William confessing what I'd done and planned to give it to him after a face-to-face confession. To this day, I don't know what happened for William to discover what was going on. For all I know, he had been monitoring my online conversations with Paul from day one. I never got to ask him how he discovered my betrayal, and the realization he'd learned what I'd done before I had the chance to tell him caused me to fall to my knees and swear I planned to tell him. William didn't believe that, and I wouldn't have either. He had a stack of texts between Paul and I printed out. Though I didn't deny any of what he accused me of, that honesty came far too late. He packed a few things in a suitcase and left me on a Monday evening. Wednesday night he drove to a shopping center, parked his car, and that was it. I could go into all the things that have happened since William passed away. His family hates me. My family was disgusted by my actions and continues to be to this day. Their love for me didn't die, but their disappointment and shame towards me will never end, and that's how it should be. I see a therapist twice a week to try and work through things. So that is my story. I want all the people who have had great relationships to cherish it and never take it for granted. As humans, we are not immune to being able to be swayed under the wrong conditions and series of events. When we love someone, we carry part of their soul around with us. Just one betrayal makes it impossible for that person to hold that piece of you again. I had my husband's heart in my hands, and I now deserve the fact that I will never again hold his heart, nor will he ever again hold me. This life has far too much pain without harming the very ones we love, and love is far too precious to risk on anything. None of the many professionals I have seen so far have a good theory as to why I let things happen. I feel like there should be some valid reason why I did what I did. I just can't come up with one, and it wouldn't be a valid reason to do what I did even if I found one. I do not keep in contact with Paul and have not heard from him since, before William's demise. The only thing I know about him are second-hand from people I worked with. I have no interest in being with Paul or having him in my life in any way. Well, Opie, you forced a good man to suffer unimaginable pain to such an extent that he felt there was no other choice but to end it all. The suffering you feel is not even close to the loss and betrayal your husband's family has been subjected to until they can find it in their hearts to forgive you. I really hope you find peace and forgiveness within yourself one day. Thank you all for listening, and do subscribe to the channel for more stories. Take care.